The galaxy was burning, and Earth wanted nothing to do with it. For 17 long years, two massive alliances had been tearing each other apart across 1,000 star systems. The Vorton Dominion controlled the northern spiral arm with their reptilian fleets and brutal military discipline. The Kelsh Alliance held the southern territories with their insectoid swarms and hive mind tactics. Between them lay hundreds of worlds caught in the crossfire and millions of species forced to choose sides or die. Earth had joined the Galactic Council only 30 years ago when humanity finally developed faster than light travel. They arrived in the stars full of hope and wonder, only to find themselves walking into a powder keg that had been waiting to explode for decades. When the war finally started, both sides immediately came knocking on Earth's door with promises and threats in equal measure. The Vorton offered trade routes and protection. The Kelsh promised technology and alliance. Both made it clear that neutrality would not be looked upon kindly. Ambassador Helen Grant stood in the council chambers for the 15th time that year, listening to another recruitment speech. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too many war briefings back on Earth. She represented a planet that had nearly destroyed itself twice with nuclear weapons and had finally learned the hard lessons about the cost of war. The ambassador let the Vorton speaker finish his passionate plea about duty and honor before she responded with the same answer. Earth had given 14 times before. Humanity would not be joining this war. Earth would provide humanitarian aid to refugees from both sides. Earth would maintain trade with any species that approached peacefully. Earth would offer medical assistance to wounded soldiers, regardless of which flag they served under. But Earth would not send weapons, and Earth would not send soldiers. The decision was final, and it was not up for debate. The Vorton representative was a massive creature named Kusher who stood nearly 8 feet tall with scales that gleamed like polished bronze under the chamber lights. His yellow eyes fixed on Ambassador Grant, with barely concealed contempt. He had fought in 73 battles and commanded fleets that had reduced planets to ash. To him, this human woman represented everything weak about Earth. They had the weapons to make a difference. Intelligence reports showed that human ships were fast and well-armed. Their soldiers trained constantly, and their tactical simulations were studied by both sides. Yet they refused to act. In Kusher's mind, there was only one word for such behavior, and that word was cowardice. He would remember this insult, and he would remember Earth's smug neutrality. Someday these humans would learn that in a galaxy at war there were no safe spaces and no neutral ground. There were only victors and victims, and those foolish enough to think they could be neither. Back on Earth, life continued in peaceful routine. The war seemed distant and almost unreal when viewed from the clean streets of Geneva or the bustling markets of New Delhi. Most humans went about their daily lives barely thinking about the conflict that raged among the stars. But there were those who looked up at the night sky and wondered how long peace could last when the rest of the galaxy had chosen violence. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was one of those people. He served aboard the UES Horizon, a massive medical frigate that traveled to war-torn systems with a single mission: save lives. The ship was painted white, with the Red Cross of Earth's medical corps displayed prominently on every surface. It carried no weapons except point defense systems meant to intercept incoming fire. Its shields were designed to protect, not to attack. The Horizon went wherever the dying were, and it made no distinction between friend or enemy or neutral. Jake was 32 years old with the kind of face that smiled easily, despite everything he had seen. He had brown hair kept military short and brown eyes that still held some optimism about the galaxy. Even after 3 years of pulling wounded aliens from burning ships, he had joined Earth's space service because he believed in the mission. He had stayed because he had seen what difference they could make. His sister Lisa worked in the ship's main medical bay. Dr. Lisa Morrison was 2 years younger than her brother, and where Jake was optimistic, Lisa was fiercely determined. She had waist-length, black hair that she kept tied back while working, and hands that moved with absolute precision. Whether she was operating on a Vorton soldier or a Kelsh civilian, she had treated species from 40 different worlds, and she approached each patient with the Same unwavering dedication. The siblings had grown up in Seattle watching their father work as an emergency room doctor. They had learned early that life was precious regardless of who lived it. When Earth joined the Galactic Council, both of them had enlisted immediately. They wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. They wanted to show the galaxy that humanity had learned from its violent past. The Horizon had just completed a mission to a refugee station near the border between Vorten and Kelsch space. They had treated over 2,000 wounded in 3 weeks. Jake had coordinated rescue operations while Lisa had performed surgeries that lasted 18 hours straight. Now they were heading to Belter Station 4. Resupply and a brief rest period. Belter Station orbited a neutral world called Belter Prime that had managed to avoid the war through a combination of useful location and careful diplomacy. The station served as a trading hub where both sides could conduct business without officially acknowledging each other. It was crowded and chaotic and full of merchants and smugglers and refugees looking for passage to safer systems. The Horizon docked there regularly because it was one of the few places in contested space where they could get supplies without being harassed. Jake watched through the bridge windows as the station grew larger in the viewport. It was a massive ring of metal and lights spinning slowly to generate artificial gravity. Ships of every design clustered around its docking ports like remeras around a shark. He could see Vorten warships on one side and Kelsch carriers on the other, with a careful buffer zone of neutral vessels between them. The captain gave the crew 3 days of shore leave while the ship underwent maintenance. Most of the crew would stay aboard catching up on sleep, but Jake and Lisa decided to explore the station. They had been in space for 2 months, and both of them wanted to walk on something that did not move beneath their feet. They wanted fresh food from the markets and maybe a drink at one of the cantinas where civilians and soldiers from both sides mixed uneasily but peacefully. It seemed like a simple shore leave, a chance to relax before the next mission. Neither of them knew that this visit to Belter Station would change everything. Neither of them knew that in 3 days humanity's carefully maintained neutrality would shatter like glass. Neither of them knew that the galaxy was about to learn a lesson that Earth had hoped it would never have to teach. The cantina was called the Starlight Rest, and it sat on the outer ring of Belter Station, where the windows looked out into open space. Jake and Lisa found a table near the back where they could watch the crowd without being in the middle of it. The place was packed with beings from a dozen different species, all trying to forget the war for a few hours. Music played from speakers mounted on the walls, and the air smelled like a mixture of alcohol and cooking food and things Jake could not quite identify. Lisa ordered something. The menu claimed was similar to coffee, while Jake got a local beer that tasted like metal and regret. They sat together talking about nothing important and enjoying the simple pleasure of being off duty. Around them, Vorten soldiers in their dark armor sat at tables near the bar. Kelsch traders with their chittering language occupied booths along the far wall. Human crew members from other Earth ships scattered throughout the room. Everyone maintained an uneasy peace because Belter Station enforced strict rules about violence. The Morrison siblings had been there for about an hour when Commander Kirscher entered with 6 of his officers. Jake recognized him immediately from the news broadcasts. The massive Vorten was hard to miss, and his reputation preceded him. Kirscher had just returned from a campaign where his fleet had bombarded 3 Kelsch colonies. The news reports said 15,000 civilians had died, but Kirscher called it a military necessity. He was celebrating his victory, and he had no interest in being quiet about it. The Vorten soldiers took over a section of the cantina near the entrance and demanded service. They were loud and aggressive and clearly drunk on something stronger than beer. They had brought bottles of Kelsch liquor that they had looted from one of the colonies. Every time they took a drink, they would laugh and make jokes about the aliens they had killed. Most of the other patrons tried to ignore them, but the tension in the room grew thicker with every passing minute. Jake wanted to leave, but Lisa insisted they finish their drinks. She refused to be intimidated by bullies, no matter how large or well-armed they were. It was one of the things Jake admired about his sister, and one of the things that worried him. Lisa had never learned to back down from a fight, even when backing down was the smart choice that trouble started. When a young Kelsh refugee child ran through the cantina chasing something that looked like a floating toy. The child was maybe 7 years old in human terms, with bright green chitin and large compound eyes that spar. Cold with innocent joy. He was laughing as he ran, and he did not see Commander Kusher until he bumped directly into the massive Vorton's leg. The cantina went silent. The child looked up at Kusher and his joy turned to terror. Everyone in the room knew what Kusher had done to Kelsh colonies. Everyone knew his reputation. The child's parents were across the room, and they stood frozen with fear as Kusher looked down at the small creature that dared to touch him. Kusher reached for his sidearm, and the room held its breath. The weapon was designed to punch through armor plating, so what it would do to a child's body did not bear thinking about. His officers laughed as if this were some grand joke. One of them suggested they should mount the child's shell on the wall as a trophy. Jake moved without thinking. One moment he was sitting at his table, and the next he was standing between Kusher and the child with his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. His heart hammered in his chest, but his voice came out steady and calm. Easy there. He is just a kid. Kusher's yellow eyes focused on Jake, and something cruel and eager flickered in their depths. Here was one of those coward humans who talked about peace while hiding behind neutrality. Here was a chance to teach this weak species a lesson about the real galaxy. The Vorton commander smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. He still held his weapon, but instead of firing it, he reversed his grip and swung the heavy metal grip like a club. The blow caught Jake across the left side of his face with enough force to drop a smaller being. Jake staggered, but he did not fall. Blood ran hot down his cheek from where the weapon's edge had split skin. His vision blurred for a moment, and pain exploded through his skull, but he kept his feet under him. Behind him, he could hear the child crying and small feet running toward safety. That is what I thought. Kusher's voice carried across the silent cantina. Humans talk about peace because they are too weak to fight. Jake's crewmates were on their feet, moving toward him, but he raised a hand to stop them. His face was a mask of blood, but his eyes were clear. We are leaving. No trouble. He reached down and picked up the Kelsh child who had frozen in terror and began walking toward the exit. Every step felt like miles, and he could feel Kusher's eyes burning into his back. The Vorton commander was not finished. He had humiliated the human, but humiliation was not enough. He wanted to prove human weakness beyond any doubt. He wanted everyone in this cantina to see what happened when someone stood against the Vorton Dominion. He raised his weapon and took aim at the human's back. He would fire a shot that would pass close enough to make the human run, close enough to make him drop the child and scramble for cover, close enough to prove that all human courage was an act. But Kusher was drunk, and his aim was compromised, and Jake had moved at just the wrong moment to look back at his crew. The plasma bolt that was meant to pass near. Jake's head instead streaked across the cantina in a line of superheated death and struck someone who had just entered through the side door. Lisa Morrison had gone to check on the ship and was returning to meet her brother. She walked through the door with a smile on her face that died the instant the plasma bolt hit her in the chest. The weapon was designed to penetrate battle armor. Against human flesh and bone, it was catastrophically effective. Lisa's body lifted off the ground from the impact, and she fell backward onto the metal floor. Time seemed to stop. Jake dropped the child and ran to his sister. His hands pressed against the massive wound in her chest, but there was too much damage and too much blood. Medical training told him she had seconds, at best. Brother instinct made him try anyway. He called her name, and his voice broke on the word. Lisa looked up at him, and somehow, through the pain, she managed a weak smile. Her hand reached up and touched his bloody cheek with fingers that were already growing cold. Do not let them make you into something you are not. Her voice was barely a whisper, and Jake had to lean close to hear it. Promise me. Jake promised through tears that he could not stop. He promised even though he did not know if he could keep that promise. He held his sister as her eyes lost focus and her breathing stopped. He held her for long minutes while the cantina remained frozen in shocked silence. He held her until his crewmates gently pulled him away and medical personnel arrived to confirm. What everyone already knew, Dr. Lisa Morrison was dead. She had spent 3 years saving lives across a dozen worlds. She had treated thousands of patients from dozens of species. She had asked for nothing except the chance to help others. And she had died because a drunken commander wanted to humiliate her brother. Commander. Kusher stood frozen with his weapon still in his hand. For the first time in his long military career, he felt something like fear. He had just killed a human doctor on a neutral station in front of hundreds of witnesses. He had killed a non-combatant medical officer. He had violated every law of war that even the brutal Vorton Dominion claimed to follow. His officers stood silent and pale. Even they understood the magnitude of what had just happened. Jake Morrison looked up from his sister's body. His face was covered in blood, both his own and hers. His eyes found Kusher across the cantina, and the Vorton commander saw something in that human's expression that made his scales crawl. It was not rage, though rage was there. It was not hatred, though hatred burned behind those eyes. It was something colder and more terrible. It was the look of someone making a decision. It was the look of a door closing forever. Security forces arrived, and the scene descended into chaos. Kusher and his officers were detained. The Kelsch child and his parents were escorted to safety. Jake was pulled away from Lisa's body and taken to the medical bay for treatment. The news of what happened began spreading through the station and then through the faster. Then light communication networks that connected the galaxy Earth had maintained its neutrality through 17 years of brutal warfare. Earth had refused every recruitment attempt and every threat. Earth had insisted that there was a better way than violence. But Earth had never been tested like this. Earth had never lost one of its own to casual brutality by a commander who thought humans were too weak to matter. The galaxy was about to learn that it had made a terrible mistake. Not because humans were secretly violent or warlike. Not because Earth had been hiding its true nature. But because there is a difference between choosing peace and being incapable of enforcing it. There is a difference between refusing to fight and being unable to fight. And Commander Kusher had just forced Earth to show the galaxy that difference. The news reached Earth within 6 hours through the faster-than-light communication network that connected all Council worlds. Dr. Lisa Morrison killed on Belter. Stationed by Vorton Commander in unprovoked attack. The message was brief and clinical, but it spread through Earth's population like wildfire. Within 12 hours, every human on the planet knew her name and knew how she died. Within 18 hours, protests filled the streets of every major city on Earth. Within 24 hours, the United Earth government called an emergency session. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session as well. Representatives from 200 species gathered. In the great chamber on the neutral world of Axis Prime, Ambassador Helen Grant stood before them with a black armband on her, sleeve and grief etched into every line of her face. She had known Lisa Morrison personally. She had approved the young doctor's assignment to the UES Horizon. She had believed that medical ships would be safe because even in war, there were supposed to be rules. The Vorton Dominion sent their chief diplomat to offer formal apologies. He was an older Vorton named Threk, who had opposed the war from the beginning, but had been overruled by the military faction. He stood before the council and called Lisa's death a tragic accident. He offered reparations to her family. He promised that Commander Kusher would face military justice under Vorton law. His words were carefully chosen and diplomatically perfect. Then Commander Kusher himself was brought before the council to give testimony. He had been detained on Belter Station and transported under guard to face questioning. He stood in his black armor with his weapons removed and his hands bound, but his pride remained intact. When asked to describe the incident, he gave a military report that was cold and factual. He had been celebrating a victory. A Kelsch child had assaulted him. A human had interfered. He had fired a warning shot that had unfortunately struck the human doctor. Regrettable, but these things happen in war zones. The council chamber erupted in angry voices. The Kelsch Alliance demanded immediate punishment. Neutral species called for sanctions against the Vorton Dominion. But it was what Kusher said next that sealed his fate and changed the course of galactic history. Perhaps if Earth had chosen a side, such confusion would not occur. If humans insist on placing themselves in war zones while refusing to fight, then they must accept the consequences of their cowardice. The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned to Ambassador Helen Grant. She had remained seated through Custer's testimony with her hands folded on the desk before her. Now she stood slowly, and her voice when she spoke carried clearly through the vast space. We are withdrawing our medical ships from all war zones, effective immediately. Earth will reassess its position. She gathered her materials, turned, and walked out of the chamber without waiting for dismissal or response.
The council dissolved into chaos. The Kelsh Alliance began calling for military alliance with Earth. The Vorton Dominion suddenly realized they might have made a catastrophic error. Neutral species tried to offer mediation. But Ambassador Grant was already aboard her ship heading back to Earth, and she was not taking calls from anyone. On Earth, something fundamental was shifting in the collective consciousness of humanity. President Daniel Carter watched the footage from Belter Station that had been leaked to the public. He watched Lisa Morrison die in her brother's arms. He watched Jake Morrison's face as he made his promise to his dying sister. The president was 60 years old and had spent his entire career working for peace. He had opposed every military expansion. He had championed neutrality even when it was unpopular. But as he watched that video, something cold and hard settled in his chest. The United Earth Assembly met in Geneva with representatives from every nation on the planet. The debate lasted 3 days, and it was broadcast live to every corner of Earth. Some argued for continuing neutrality. Some demanded immediate military response. Some suggested economic sanctions. But gradually a consensus emerged. Earth would not become conquerors. Earth would not choose sides in someone else's war. But Earth would no longer stand by while others chose violence against the innocent. President Carter addressed the planet from the same chamber where the United Nations had once met. His speech was broadcast across the galaxy as well because Earth wanted everyone to hear what came next. We came to the stars hoping for something better than what we left behind. We offered peace and healing and cooperation. We asked only to be left alone to pursue our ideals. We believed that our example might inspire others to choose a better path. We were wrong. Not about the value of peace, but about the price of maintaining it. That ends today. The president's next words sent shockwaves through the diplomatic community. Earth is activating its military defense protocols. We are recalling all civilian vessels from contested space. We are mobilizing our fleet. And we are issuing an ultimatum to the Vorton Dominion. Commander Kusher will be turned over to Earth custody within 7 days to face trial for murder. If this demand is not met, we will come and get him ourselves. This is not negotiable, and it is not subject to debate. The Vorton Dominion immediately rejected the ultimatum. They claimed jurisdiction over their own military officers. They suggested that Earth was overreacting to an unfortunate accident. They reminded humanity that the Vorton fleet consisted of thousands of warships, while Earth had never deployed a military vessel beyond its own solar system. They were confident that human threats were empty bluster from a species that had finally lost its composure. They were about to learn how wrong they were. While Earth had maintained public neutrality, the government had not been idle. For 30 years, Earth's military had been preparing for the possibility that peace might fail. They had studied every battle of the Galactic War. They had analyzed Vorton tactics and Kelsh strategies. They had built ships in orbital facilities far from prying eyes. They had trained soldiers in secret bases on Mars and Europa. They had developed weapons based on human ingenuity rather than copied alien technology. And they had hoped desperately that they would never need to use any of it. Jake Morrison was released from medical treatment on Belter Station with 16 stitches in his face and a scar that would mark him for the rest of his life. He was transported back to Earth along with his sister's body. The funeral was held in Seattle, where they had grown up, and it was attended by thousands. Representatives from 40 different species came to pay their respects to the doctor who had treated their people with compassion and skill. The Kelsh delegation brought flowers from their homeworld. Even some Vorton soldiers who Lisa had saved sent messages of condolence. Jake stood at his sister's grave and felt hollow inside. He had made her a promise that he did not know how to keep. She had asked him not to let them make him into something he was not. But what was he supposed to be now? How was he supposed to honor her memory when his hands wanted to hurt something and his heart wanted revenge, even though his mind knew that revenge would disappoint her? General Patricia Hayes found him at the cemetery after the other mourners had left. She was a stern woman in her 50s who commanded Earth's Space Defense Forces. She had known Jake's father, and she had followed Jake's career with interest. She stood beside him looking at Lisa's headstone and was quiet for a long moment before she spoke. Your sister was a good person, the best kind of person. She believed everyone deserved a chance, and she gave that chance to thousands. But believing everyone deserves a chance does not mean accepting it when someone throws that chance away. Jake looked at the general and waited for her to continue. We are activating the Dark Sky Protocol. We are sending a military fleet into Vorten space. We need officers who understand what we are fighting for and what we are fighting against. We need people who know the difference between justice and revenge. Your sister saved more lives than most soldiers ever see in combat. She earned the right to have her death mean something. I'm offering you the chance to make sure it does. The general handed him a datapad with orders already written. He was being promoted to captain. He was being given command of the UES Retribution, a warship that had been built in secret over the past decade. His mission was simple on paper and impossibly complex in execution. Find Commander Crusher's fleet. Show them why Earth chose peace. And come home alive. Jake looked at the orders and thought about his sister's last words. Do not let them make you into something you are not. He thought about the Kelsch child he had tried to protect. He thought about the thousands of patients Lisa had treated. He thought about the difference between fighting because you love violence and fighting because you love something worth protecting. He thought about the fact that Lisa had spent her life proving that mercy and compassion were strengths, not weaknesses. Maybe the way to honor that was to prove that peace backed by strength was more powerful than violence alone. He accepted the orders. Within 3 days he was aboard the UES Retribution running shakedown drills with a crew of volunteers. Within a week they were ready to deploy. Within 10 days they would be in Vorten space. And the galaxy was about to learn that humanity had not spent 30 years running away from war. They had spent 30 years preparing to fight it properly if they had no other choice. They had hoped that choice would never come. Commander Crusher had taken that hope and killed it along with a young doctor who had never hurt anyone. Now he would learn the price of that mistake, and it would be paid in full. The UES Retribution emerged from slip space at the edge of Vorten. Controlled territory with 7 other Earth warships in perfect formation. They appeared on every sensor screen in the sector simultaneously, and the effect was immediate. Vorten patrol ships scrambled to intercept positions. Defense stations went to full alert. Commander Crusher's fleet, which had been conducting operations near a mining colony, received emergency orders to return to defensive positions. The humans had actually come. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Retribution and felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. The ship was larger than any vessel Earth had deployed before, with a crew of 300, who had all volunteered for this mission. Every single person aboard had lost someone to the war or knew someone who had. Some had friends who died on medical ships. Others had family killed in crossfire. All of them believed that what they were doing was necessary, even if none of them wanted it to be. The tactical display showed the full scope of what they faced. Crusher commanded 42 warships currently in this system alone. The Vorten Dominion had another 80 ships within a day's travel. Against this, Earth had sent 8 vessels. The numbers looked impossible, but numbers were not everything. Earth had spent 30 years preparing for a war they hoped would never come. They had not wasted that time. Lieutenant Emma Pierce sat at the communications station with her hands ready over the controls. She was 26 years old and had joined the service because her mother had been a nurse on one of the medical frigates. She had been the one to decrypt the message from Belter Station about Lisa Morrison's death. Now she watched her captain and waited for orders. "Captain, we are being hailed by Vorten Command." Jake nodded and Crusher's face appeared on the main view screen. The Vorten commander looked even larger on the screen. and his yellow eyes gleamed with amusement mixed with contempt. The cowards finally show themselves. One small fleet against the might of the Dominion. You humans are even more foolish than I thought. Behind him his bridge crew moved with military precision, preparing weapons and coordinating with the rest of his fleet. Jake kept his expression calm and his voice level. Commander Kusher, you are being charged with the murder of Dr. Lisa Morrison, a non-combatant engaged in humanitarian work. Surrender yourself for trial, and we will withdraw. He knew what the answer would be, but his sister had believed everyone deserved a chance. He would give Kusher that chance even if the Vorton did not deserve it. Kusher laughed, and the sound was harsh and mocking. You cannot threaten us, human. We have 80 warships in this sector. Alone, you have 8. Leave now, and we will pretend this pathetic display never happened. We might even forgive your foolish ultimatum. His clawed hand moved over his weapons console in a gesture meant to be threatening. Stay, and we will add 8 human ships to the debris field around this system. Jake glanced at the chronometer on his display. I will give you 1 hour to reconsider. My sister believed everyone deserved a chance. I am honoring that belief. After 1 hour, I will consider your answer delivered. He cut the transmission before Kusher could respond. Around him, his bridge crew exchanged glances. They had all known this was coming, but actually being here facing it was different than training simulations. Commander Lisa Chun sat at the tactical station named after Jake's sister at his request. She was 34 years old and had spent 10 years analyzing alien combat tactics. She looked at her captain with concern written across her features. Sir, they are moving to attack positions. 42 ships are forming a battlesphere around our position. Standard Vorton doctrine. They will try to catch us in crossfire from multiple vectors. Her fingers danced across her console, bringing up threat assessments and defensive options. Jake watched the enemy ships move into position on the tactical display. Kusher was confident, and why would he not be? The numbers favored him overwhelmingly. Vorton ships were proven in hundreds of battles. Vorton weapons had reduced planets to ash. Against this Earth was sending ships that had never seen combat and a crew that had never fired shots in anger. On paper it looked like suicide. But paper did not account for everything humanity had learned and built and planned. 50-8 minutes passed in tense silence. Jake spent the time reviewing tactical data and checking with each department. Engineering reported all systems optimal. Weapons reported ready status. Medical bay was prepared for casualties. The crew was ready. They were scared, but they were ready. When the chronometer hit 59 minutes, Jake took a deep breath and gave the order that would change everything. All ships execute Protocol Olympus, the 8 Earth. Ships moved as one with coordination that seemed impossible without hive mind communication. They accelerated in a pattern that the Vorton computers could not predict because it was based on human, tactical thinking that no alien had ever encountered. The Retribution dove toward the Vorton line at a speed that pushed the inertial dampeners to their limits. The other Earth ships split into pairs executing maneuvers. That looked random, but were actually carefully choreographed chaos. Kusher ordered his fleet to fire, and 42 warships unleashed everything they had. Missiles streaked through space in waves that should have overwhelmed any defense. Plasma cannons fired in coordinated patterns designed to saturate target areas. Energy beams lanced out to cut through shields and hull plating. It was the kind of firepower that had shattered Kelsch battle groups and broken planetary defenses. The Vorton crews watched their displays confident that the humans would be destroyed in the first salvo, but the missiles never reached their targets. Earth's point defense systems activated with precision that seemed supernatural. Thousands of small railguns fired solid projectiles at relativistic speeds, creating a wall of kinetic death that intercepted every missile before it could arm. Plasma bolts were deflected by shields that had been designed specifically to handle energy weapons. The Earthships emerged from the firestorm completely undamaged and still accelerating. The Retribution fired its main weapons for the first time in combat. Human railguns launched solid metal slugs at a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles were simple chunks of dense alloy with no guidance systems or warheads. They did not need anything fancy. At the speeds they traveled, mass and velocity were the only weapons required. The first slug hit a Vorton cruiser's shields and punched through like paper. Vorton shields were designed to disperse energy weapons. They had never been tested against kinetic impacts at these velocities. The slug continued through the ship from bow to stern, and the cruiser broke apart in a cascade of explosions. The Vorton fleet reacted with confusion that quickly turned to panic. Their weapons were not working, and their shields were useless against these strange human projectiles. Ships tried to maneuver, but the Earth vessels were faster and more agile than anything the Vorton had encountered. The human ships moved like fighters despite being the size of cruisers. They executed turns that should have liquefied their crews, but somehow the humans had solved the inertial problems that limited every other species. But the real terror came from what the humans did to Vorton computer systems. Earth's electronic warfare capabilities had been refined through decades of cybersecurity, evolution against human hackers, and artificial intelligence threats. Vorton computer networks, by comparison, were primitive and vulnerable. Human AI systems infiltrated Vorton networks through their own communication channels and spread like wildfire. Ships lost targeting computers. Life support systems flickered and failed. Communication arrays broadcast gibberish. Weapons refused to fire or fired at random directions. Navigation systems reported false positions. The Vorton fleet dissolved into chaos as their technology betrayed them within 20 minutes. Kusher's 42-ship fleet had been reduced to 80 functional vessels. The others were crippled or destroyed or simply drifting helpless with their systems completely compromised. The Vorton commander stared at his displays in disbelief. This was impossible. Humans were weak. Humans were cowards. Humans had never even fought in space combat before. Yet his fleet was being destroyed by 8 ships that moved like ghosts and struck like thunder. The Retribution closed on Kusher's flagship with deliberate purpose. Jake watched the range close and felt no satisfaction. This was necessary, but it was not enjoyable. His sister would have hated what he was doing. But his sister was dead because Kusher thought humans were too weak to matter. Now Kusher would learn the cost of that assumption. Target their engines and weapons systems. Disable but do not destroy. We need him alive. Commander Chun executed the orders with precision. Railgun slugs tore through the flagship's engine array with surgical accuracy. Point defense lasers cut through weapon ports and sensor clusters. Within minutes, Kusher's ship was dead in space, unable to maneuver or fight or even call for help. The mighty Vorton commander, who had destroyed colonies and killed thousands, was now helpless, aboard a crippled ship surrounded by human vessels that had appeared from nowhere and dismantled his fleet. In less than half an hour, Jake opened a channel to the flagship. Commander Kusher, your ship is disabled. Your fleet is defeated. You have 2 choices: surrender and face trial for the murder of Dr. Lisa Morrison, or we will board your ship and take you by force. Either way, you are coming with us. Choose now. His voice was calm but carried absolute certainty. This was not a negotiation. This was a statement of fact. On the viewscreen, Kusher's face showed an emotion the Vorton had rarely experienced: fear. He looked at the human captain with a scar on his face and suddenly understood what he had done. He had not just killed a doctor. He had awakened something that the galaxy had never seen before. Humans had chosen peace not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to make that choice. And now he had forced them to show that strength. The Vorton commander's hand moved toward his weapon, but his second officer stunned him before he could draw it. The Vorton officer looked at Jake through the viewscreen with something like respect in his eyes. He dishonored us all. We are warriors, not murderers of healers. Commander Kusher is yours. We will not resist your boarding parties. He lowered his weapons and ordered his crew to stand down. Around the system, other Vorton ships were doing the same. They had seen what happened to those who fought. They had seen their impregnable defenses torn apart like paper. They were soldiers, and they knew when they were beaten. The boarding action was swift and professional. Earth's Marines moved through the Vorton flagship in teams of 4 wearing armor. That made them look like something from a nightmare. They carried weapons that could switch from stun to lethal with a simple adjustment, but every Marine had orders to avoid killing unless absolutely necessary. This was not about revenge. This was about justice. There was a difference even if the Vorton had never understood it. Jake Morrison led the team to the bridge, still wearing his uniform with the scar on his face clearly visible under the harsh lighting. When the doors opened, Kusher was waiting with his remaining command staff. The massive Vorton commander had regained consciousness and was being held by 2 of his own officers. His weapons were gone and his armor was damaged, but his pride remained mostly intact. He looked at Jake with hatred burning in his yellow eyes, but also with something else that might have been understanding. Commander, Kusher, you are under arrest for the murder of Dr. Lisa Morrison. You will be transported to Earth to stand trial before an international tribunal. You have the right to legal representation and the right to present a defense. Do you understand these rights? Jake's voice was formal and cold. He was not here as Lisa's brother. He was here as a captain in Earth's military carrying out a lawful order. The distinction mattered even if it hurt. Kusher's hand moved toward a hidden weapon that his officers had missed. He would not be taken alive by these humans. He would not face their justice or their judgment. Better to die fighting than to submit to creatures he had called cowards. His fingers closed around the grip and he started to draw. The weapon never cleared its holster. Kusher's own second officer drew faster and fired a stun blast at point-blank range. The massive Vorton commander collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The officer looked at Jake with an expression that was difficult to read on a reptilian face. He dishonored us all. We are warriors, not murderers of healers. We follow codes of combat and he violated every one of them. He is yours to judge. The Marine team secured Kusher and transported him to the Retribution's brig. The rest of the Vorton fleet surrendered without further resistance. News of what happened spread through the faster-than-light networks within hours. 8 human ships had defeated 42 Vorton warships in less than 30 minutes with minimal casualties. The galaxy's military experts scrambled to analyze how this was possible. Intelligence agencies tried to determine what other capabilities Earth might be hiding. Political leaders reassessed every assumption they had made about humanity. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the second time in a month. This time, when Ambassador Helen Grant entered the chamber, the other delegates stood in respect. The human representative took her seat and waited for the session to begin. The chamber was packed with observers from every member species, and the gallery was filled with journalists recording everything. The Vorton Dominion's chief diplomat stood first. He was the same older Vorton named Threk who had offered apologies after Lisa's death. Now he stood before the council and his words carried the weight of a government that had suddenly realized its vulnerability. The Vorton Dominion acknowledges that Commander Kusher acted dishonorably in outside military law. We accept Earth's right to try him for his crimes. We also wish to open formal negotiations regarding the status of medical ships and humanitarian workers in war zones. His voice was steady, but everyone could hear the undertone of fear. The Kelsh Alliance representative spoke next, clicking and chittering in their native language, while a translator converted it to common speech. The Kelsh Alliance proposes a formal treaty recognizing all medical personnel as protected regardless of species or allegiance. We further propose that Earth be granted authority to enforce these protections. The insectoid ambassador's compound eyes reflected the chamber lights as it looked directly at Ambassador Grant. We have seen what happens when humans are pushed too far. We would prefer to work with you rather than against you. Neutral species began proposing various frameworks and treaties. Some suggested Earth join one of the existing alliances. Others proposed Earth become a mediating force. A few even suggested that Earth take a leadership role in the Council, given their obvious military superiority. The debate went on for hours, with everyone trying to determine what humanity wanted and what humanity would do next. Ambassador Grant listened to it all with a patient expression. When she finally stood to speak, the chamber fell silent immediately. Earth has no interest in conquest or empire. We did not come to the stars to build an empire. We came hoping to find something better than what we left behind. What we found was the same old story of violence and war that has plagued our own history. We had hoped our example might inspire change. Instead, we were ignored until we were forced to act. Her words carried across the chamber with quiet authority. She continued with a proposal that would reshape galactic politics for generations. Earth proposes the formation of an independent peacekeeping force. This force will operate under council oversight, but with autonomous authority to protect medical personnel, refugees, and civilian populations in war zones. Any species may join this force. Any ship flying under its banner will be protected by Earth's military if attacked. And any military force that targets protected persons will face immediate response. She paused and looked around the chamber. We still believe in peace. But we have learned that peace must be backed by the willingness to defend it. The vote was nearly unanimous. Only a handful of hardline military factions from both alliances voted against it. The peacekeeping force was established with Earth, providing the initial military backbone and other species contributing ships and personnel as they became available. Ambassador Grant was appointed as the civilian director, while military command went to General Patricia Hayes, who had given Jake his orders. Commander Cushor's trial lasted 3 weeks and was broadcast across the galaxy. 15 of his own officers testified against him, describing in detail how he had encouraged the attack and mocked Earth's medical personnel. The Kelsh child who had been there testified through his parents. Jake Morrison testified about what he witnessed and what his sister had said before she died. The evidence was overwhelming and the verdict was unanimous. Guilty of murder and war crimes, the Vorton Dominion requested that Cushor be turned over to them for sentencing under their own laws. Earth agreed on the condition that the sentence be carried out publicly and be proportionate to the crime. The Vorton executed Cushor themselves following their traditional methods. It was brutal and final, and it sent a message to every military commander in both alliances. The rules had changed and violations would not be tolerated. Jake Morrison remained in command of the UES Retribution, which became the flagship of the peacekeeping force. His first mission was to escort a convoy of medical ships through contested space. Both Vorton and Kelsh forces watched as the human warship passed through their territory, but neither side interfered. The medical ships reached their destination safely and began treating wounded from both sides of the conflict. In his ready room, Jake kept a photograph of Lisa smiling as she treated a young alien child. Beneath it, he had written her last words on a small plaque. Do not let them make you into something you are not. He looked at those words every day and tried to live up to them. He had not become a killer or a conqueror. He had become a protector. There was a difference, and that difference mattered. The war between the Vorton Dominion and Kelsh Alliance continued, but the nature of it changed. Civilian casualties dropped dramatically, because attacks on non-combatants brought immediate response from the peacekeeping force. Medical ships operated safely because everyone knew that harming them meant facing Earth's military. Refugee convoys moved under protection. War crimes were investigated and punished regardless of which side committed them. Within 2 years, the constant pressure of having to follow rules and protect civilians made total war unsustainable for both alliances. The cost of fighting while trying to avoid collateral damage was too high. Resources that had gone to weapons production were diverted to protecting their own civilians from peacekeeping force intervention. Gradually and reluctantly, both sides came to the negotiating table. The peace talks were held on Earth in the same Geneva chamber where the United Nations had once met. Ambassador Helen Grant mediated between delegations that had been killing each other for nearly 2 decades. The negotiations took 6 months, and there were moments when it seemed they would fail. But every time talks broke down, Jake Morrison would appear in orbit aboard the Retribution as a silent reminder of what would happen if the war continued. The Treaty of New Geneva was signed on the 3rd anniversary of Lisa Morrison's death. Both sides agreed to cease fire and began the long process of establishing permanent borders and trade agreements. Contested systems would be administered by neutral parties under peacekeeping force protection. War crime trials would continue for another decade as both sides held their own people accountable. Ambassador Grant stood before the Galactic Council as the treaty was ratified. She thought about Lisa and all the others who had died believing in something better. Today the galaxy learns what Earth knew all along. Peace is not weakness. Peace is a choice that requires strength to maintain. We tried to show you through example. You forced us to show you through action. Let us hope that from this day forward the lesson holds. Her words were broadcast across hundreds of worlds and trillions of beings heard them. Captain Jake Morrison attended the ceremony in his dress uniform with the scar on his face, a permanent reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. He thought about his sister's words and realized that he had kept his promise. He had not let them make him into something he was not. He was still the person who wanted to protect rather than destroy. The difference was that now the galaxy understood that protection sometimes required force. Earth had finally taken its place among the stars, not as humanity had hoped with open arms and universal peace, but as the galaxy had needed, with justice backed by strength and mercy supported by the willingness to act. The sleeping giant had awakened and shown the universe that choosing peace and being capable of war were not contradictions. They were two sides of the same coin, and humanity carried both. The medical ships returned to the war zones, now flying under peacekeeping force protection. New crews volunteered to continue Lisa's work, treating the wounded and sick regardless of species or allegiance. And above them all, the UES Retribution and its sister ships patrolled the space lanes, ensuring that those who healed would never again be harmed for their compassion. The GA,